This is the Flex Network. This is the Flex Network. Flex on them. Flex on everybody. This right here is the Flex Network. Yeah. Flex on the G. Flex.
Oh, yes, everybody. The Flex Network is back again with another Dynasty Flex. Not a super flex. I would almost said super flex because I was getting hype. It's not necessarily a super flex podcast, but it's the Dynasty Flex podcast that is super inherently. So you could almost say that it's a super Dynasty Flex. Either way, new mic, who dis. This is Shaner on the other end here. Shane, you got a new setup here. It's let's hear how you go. How's it sounding here, brothers?
All right, what's going on, Beck?
Yeah.
So yeah, we were just talking before we started rolling here that I am living in 2019 in terms of the audio, but I'm living way back in like 2011. So I guess that would be 8 years with this computer I'm using. So hopefully the audio turns out, because I would say most of our consumption is through audio. For anybody who, frankly, my mug probably shied people away from the video content anyways. So we'll just roll with it.
Yeah, I said to you, I go, man, I got, it's just kind of funny because I said to you, I go, hey, I got like a toothache today. You're like, really? Because I'm kind of coming down with the cold. And I'm like, oh, damn, this is going to be something interesting here. So I went ahead and I straight up doubled down on the coffee that's probably hurting me. But I'm ready to go, Shane. So
let's fucking do it.
Yeah, you sent a couple things over to me that we're going to talk about today that I definitely was very interested in. And I think it's a big part of this year. I believe. Now, we are talking about this in terms of Dynasty, but it definitely has a lot of redraft implications. So go ahead. Let's get into it right away here.
Yeah, okay. So this is something that I've kind of been thinking about for a little while, because in one of my Dynasty teams, I think I mentioned it before, I took it over. So it's an orphan team. And typically I would want to avoid those sort of things, kind of like the plague, right? Because do you really want to spend 2-3 years rebuilding a team if it's just a pile of garbage on that team? Frankly, I don't have the patience for that sort of thing. But this team had a pretty solid core of running backs. It had Ezekiel Elliott, it had Dalvin Cook, and it had Marlon Mack. Really just kind of holding down that core of your team, and then just a bunch of other pieces. So as I've been working through the offseason, I'm slowly trying to mine for depth, essentially, and grow my starting lineup. And frankly, I want to be a contender this year. And I think I can be with that running back core. The league itself's pretty top heavy. There's about 3 teams that just they're just absolutely killer. So I'm trying to decide myself, what do I want to do with my elite level players? And so then when I look at my elite in Dynasty, talk about from the running back perspective, you look at, there's the Saquon Barkleys of the world, there's Ezekiel Elliott, there's CMC, so Christian McCaffrey. And then I would say that Alvin Kamara is probably that 4th guy. The reason I say the 4th is because I just don't think he's going to get the volume that those other 3 guys are going to get. So those are I guess you could call it the Mount Rushmore for you Americans. The Mount Rushmore of the running back core. And then you look at, on the other side, the wide receivers. So there's Hopkins, right? There is Devontae Adams. And then I would say Michael Thomas. Some people would throw Odell Beckham in there. I don't quite throw him in there simply because I think that even though he's an elite talent, and I'd say from a talent perspective, he's definitely in that conversation, I just think that opportunity on that team, I think Cleveland, there's just too many mouths to feed to make him that very top elite in terms of basically payoff. So then there's the question of, okay, so say right now I'm trying to mine wide receivers on my team, because we know that typically in a dynasty, your wide receivers will have a longer lifespan. I mean, in terms of elite production from a running back, I mean, just look at Todd Gurley, man. It's fragile. It's fragile. There's more risk. You'll probably get, let's call it 3 years of peak production out of those players. And then typically you'll have that ramp up year, right, at the start of his career. And then you'll have that ramp down maybe 1 or 2 seasons. So you'll probably get 5 good seasons. And now, I mean, this kind of goes away from the whole I want to win now conversation. Let's kind of put that to the side. So say you're just looking for a team of stable players. At what point would you say, yeah, straight up, let's, for argument's sake, let's just say Hopkins is the number 1 receiver in a PPR league in terms of dynasty. At what point would you say, let's straight up trade you Ezekiel Elliott for DeAndre Hopkins? Would you do that? And I asked myself, would I do that? And I was actually put in that position the other day. And I was like, no, I would not do that, because I think that on any given week in a head-to-head format, I think that Ezekiel Elliott has the opportunity to score, frankly, just more points than one of those other wide receivers. And yes, you might get an insane 30 or 40 point game from some of those top wide receivers, but I think you're going to consistently get those 20 to 25 point games from Zeke, or even any of those top guys, far more consistently. And I said, listen, I was talking to this guy. I said, listen, if I'm going to do this, my price is basically not only Hopkins, but I want another elite starter in Dynasty. And I threw out that, I mean, he had a few guys, but I said DJ Moore would be my cost. It'd be, and I'll maybe throw in like a 3rd round pick coming back. And he didn't want to do it, and I understand why. But to me, that would be the cost of getting rid of one of these top 3 or 4 running backs. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, that's an intense kind of trade that you're making, and those are the exact kind of trades that this guy right here with 2 thumbs really likes to make. Okay, I'm the kind of guy that I will chase the upside, but the big I guess talk about this isn't so much whether or not the guy straight up is worth the other player, because yes, obviously I think straight up, if you're in a vacuum, you swap the guys, you're happy to do it, and you get good guys on both sides, upper echelon, elite tier people. That's fine. But the real kind of caveat to this is, what does the rest of your roster look like? That's what's going to signify whether or not you would do a deal like that. So if you're sitting on, who is your RBs again?
Yeah, so that's the thing, is I've got Zeke, I've got Dalvin Cook, and I've got Marlon Mack as my core running backs. And then I got a bunch of, like, I got Jerick McKinnon is probably my 4th. And then just a whole lot of nothing. I got Jalen Samuels. So guys who you really wouldn't feel comfortable plugging into your starting lineup on any given week. I mean, you need something to happen before you want to really start any of those guys.
So what's your wide receiver core look like?
So this is the one where I got Tyler Boyd last week. So I've got Tyler Boyd, Kenny Galladay, got Kiki QT, and then again just a bunch of guys. So I'm kind of like I'm weak in terms of depth overall. Like my overall depth on my bench is quite weak. I've got Paris Campbell and I've got Deebo Samuel, but this.
So you're not weak at all. I mean,
well,
that's
listen, again, it comes back to the I want to win today, right? I think that a guy like Deebo, and I'm convinced that Deebo is a better player than Dante Pettis, but it's going to take, call it 5, 6, maybe half a season before he really goes in and becomes the alpha in that offense. And I think that Paris Campbell, I mean, we've talked about it. I think that next year he's going to be an alpha. I think he's going to be amazing, but what about this year? So that fundamentally comes back to the fact where there is that short lifespan for running backs. I mean, I look at Ezekiel Elliott, and man, the Cowboys are running that guy into the ground, right? Which is one of the reasons why we absolutely love him. And he's, for the most part, I'd say he's been pretty good in terms of, well, he hasn't been on the industry sheet. I think it was, I heard something, it was in the preseason of his rookie year was the last time he was on an injury report. So Zeke stays healthy. I mean, like, look at him. He's a freaking tank, right? But we also know that he's kind of a knucklehead. He was able to escape a suspension this year, thank God. But who knows about next offseason? Maybe there's a knucklehead factor throughout the season. Something happens, right? And I don't have Tony Pollard, who I think would be his handcuff. And then who knows? Like, if Dallas keeps running him to the ground, say this season and next season, do we have 2 years left of elite status? Whereas a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, who I want to say is 25 or 27 years old, I mean, he's probably got, I'd say 2-3 years of elite status left, right? Maybe he could go into his 31-year-old season, similar to an AB, and he can continue to produce. But then you talk about, well, there's Kiki QT, right? There's Will Fuller, so there's risk there, right? So it's, we're splitting hairs here, but
well, I don't know that we're splitting hairs. In this case and scenario for your own personal team, that the straight up trade for D-Hop is not even necessary or wouldn't be justified that much. To me, a 1-for-1 deal is not my suit, which is why it's not yours, obviously, and it's not our listeners. Our listeners want to get the maximum value, and so that's not it. But I wouldn't disagree with the trade if your wide receivers were worse than you said. So you've got Paris Campbell, Deebo Samuel as your future. You've got Kenny G, Tyler Boyd as your now. Okay.
Yep.
To me, there's just no need to. So what I would do is I would go find a Dalvin Cook suitor, and off him. Now, if we were to talk about what I just did in Dynasty, which makes a lot of sense, I traded Dalvin Cook essentially for Royce Freeman, Christian Kirk, and next year's second. We swapped third. So that's a way better trade for your team right now. You get a running back to kind of come back and fill your depth because you already have Marlon Mack, and you would keep Zeke. And then you would add Christian Kirk to your wide receiver core, a second-year player who might be in the highest range of outcomes, a top 12 wide receiver this year. He could be Juju Smith-Schuster of last year, and that would be a way better trade than to get D-Hop. Because here's the thing, you're not going to get any more than D-Hop when you're trading, especially even for a top-tier RB. You're just not. I mean, that's a trade that most people are squirrely about. They don't want to make. You don't want to make that trade, which is why you asked for DJ Moore.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now the real question is, if your wide receiver core was, your number one wide receiver was Tyler Boyd, your number two was Deebo Samuel, at that point, having the RBs that you have, sure, I might look to explore the 1-for-1 trade for DeAndre Hopkins. Now you can have 2 RBs and three wide receivers, one with young rookie production upside and the other 2 with great profiles, and that would be a trade. So I don't know that it's in a vacuum straight up, what are they worth each other? If not, what would you add on? Because I think they definitely are worth each other, but it really comes down to roster construction. Another thing too, if you're starting 2 running backs and you don't have a flex, or you got 2 RBs, 2 receivers, and a flex, which is the archaic way of old, Sully dynasty play or just wide receiver
you
play.
Always have to throw shade at Sully. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm cool with that.
Yeah, of course. Old Sully shade. If you're playing in an archaic league like that, then you want to have like one core piece at every tier. You know what I mean? One big running back, one big receiver. And even still in that, I would keep Zeke. That you got to keep Zeke. Right now, he's potentially the 101 in every format this year in redraft. And in Dynasty, obviously in a Dynasty redraft, he might be pushed to 3 or 4. But I mean, you're pretty much only starting 2 running backs in every league. And so you got to keep one of those cornerstone pieces. And you can always get, I would love 3 number 2 receivers on my team, a Tyler Boyd, a Christian Kirk, a Godwin, 1, 2, 3, and Zeke over Marlon Mack, D-Hop, and whoever, like a Debo or something like that. That's just my personal opinion on it. And the real thing too is it's Zeke. Like sometimes you're really not going to get value in Dynasty for Zeke. That's another kind of problem. Like you said, it's that what did you call it? The what factor? Is
it the idiot tax or the
yeah, sure, idiot tax or the douche factor.
Yeah.
The fact that every offseason you have to worry about this guy, and DeAndre Hopkins is in his prime with
Well,
the worst.
I love DeAndre Hopkins. Like we wouldn't even be having this conversation if Hopkins wasn't part of it. Like that guy, he's a class act. He's a nice guy. He's part of his community. He's a leader. Like everything about Hopkins is the kind of guy that you want. If you were building a team today, let's forget about fantasy football. Let's talk about a football team. He's the kind of guy that you want leading your wide receiver core.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I mean, I would like to build my team with Zeke too. A guy who's not often injured and just a big dude, barreling
he's hungry,
guy.
Baby. He likes to eat. Zeke loves to eat.
And he's got swagger. I mean, that's something that sells tickets, that sells jerseys, that puts butts in seats.
Absolutely.
And that almost leads us into our second trashy conversation that we're going to have today. Le'Veon Bell and the New York Jets. In my eyes, that's exactly what they did in trying to get Le'Veon Bell. What they are doing is just trying to put butts in seats, sell jerseys, give a really nice, easy outlet to their young, burgeoning, I think is the word I'm looking for, QB.
Yeah.
And what do you have to say about the Jets? Honestly, you even told me this morning, goes, man, I hope you're sitting down. I want to talk about the New York Jets.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I was
by saying I got my Patriots hat on. Okay, so this is an uncomfortable conversation, but I think it's one that we have to have. And I keep circling around guys like Sam Darnold, circling around guys like Robbie Anderson, and then even at the top of your drafts, Le'Veon Bell, who you brought up, and I'm trying to. More so, this is like an introverted type conversation of, am I comfortable having those guys on my dynasty teams? One, and then, from a redraft perspective, do you want those guys on your team? And I think that I'm wavering back and forth, but I think that as we're really ramping into redraft season, so I'm just going to focus on that perspective just a little bit here. You're seeing Le'Veon Bell crawl up. I want to say at the start of draft season in best balls, he was falling to late first, like, the 112 turn, or like the 10 or the 201. So early second round. He's creeping in there now to be the 1.7. You a lot of the times you're seeing these running back runs. So you got your top four that come off the board, and then you're going to get like a DJ and a Melvin Gordon. And then a lot of the time,
I've seen him go 6 for sure. Right now, that's kind of like a popular spot for him.
Well, that's the thing, right? Okay, so really, it's that tier of, you've got your Le'Veon Bell, you've got your Melvin Gordon, and then you got David Johnson, right? It's kind of those three guys that are in their little tier by themselves. And then a lot of the times, depending on your league setup, you're seeing this run of running backs. And maybe you'll see like one of the top receivers, like typically it's an Adams or a Hopkins, might go in that 5-6 range. But more often than not, recently, you're seeing the Le'Veon Bells of the world go off right around the 1.6, 1.7. And I'm wondering to myself, like, have we kind of gotten ahead of ourselves a little bit in terms of Le'Veon Bell? And to be honest, I don't know what the answer is, because I bet you if I'm put in that situation half the time, I'm probably going to take a wide receiver. But then the other half, I'm going to take a running back, simply because as I'm doing more and more of these drafts, especially in a 0.5 PPR type league, I'm finding that, man, those running backs are going quickly. And I find that if I've got, say, if I go running back and 1 and 2, I'm just a hell of a lot more comfortable in my, by round 8 or 9, in terms of going and looking back at my team and saying, okay, there's a lot of pretty decent wide receivers out there that we can mine, including a guy like Robbie Anderson, who you're getting probably at this point, late 6th round, early 7th round in terms of his ADP. And that's a guy who he could be a wide receiver 1. And, and so say pivot away from a Le'Veon Bell early on in round 1 and come back and get the Robbie Anderson in the end of round 6, early round 7. And then you look at a guy like Sam Darnold, who through the month of December was playing at a very high level. And I think that maybe we're sleeping on the Jets a little bit. I mean, shit, like this is a team that's got a new coaching staff. When I look at Football Outsiders, unfortunately, their offensive line was dead last at number 32 last year. But 4 to the 5 guys are coming back this year, which means there's some consistency on that offensive line. They've got obviously a new coaching staff, including a new offensive line coach. So maybe they're actually going to take a step forward. And, even if I don't expect them to be like a top 10 offensive line, but if they can be up there, call it between 20 to 15 in the league, give Sam Darnold a little bit more time to throw the ball. I mean, he's going to understand the game a little bit better. They've got a pretty decent supporting cast. I want to say Jamison Crowder is going to be there. My boy, Mr. Neck, Quincy Enunwa, he's there. And you saw that when he's actually healthy.
Mr. Neck.
Well, I mean, he's had neck injuries for 2 years in a row, right? That's what he's been recovering from. I was going to go dark, and then I decided that since this is being broadcast to the world, that I probably shouldn't. But
yeah, that was a good idea.
Yeah, exactly right. This shit
I
lasts
thought you
forever.
meant Mr. Neck, meaning like the dude looks like a giraffe running down.
He is a giraffe, and that's what I'm saying. Like from a like size, speed specimen, he's there, right? So, and then you look at a guy like Chris Herndon, who I think he's pretty much everybody's favorite breakout candidate this year. I mean, he's suspended for the first 2 games because of the DUI, but he's a breakout candidate. And then you just look at their defense, which every year they're usually a top 15 defense, right? So that the reason I say that is because you don't want them to be super elite, because you don't want the offense to stay on the field. You want them moving that ball, but it also means that there's an opportunity where they're going to be grinding the clock a little bit with your Le'Veon Bell, right? So you want that for your running backs. And I'm starting to get the feeling that I kind of like this Jets offense a little bit. And the reason I bring them up is because they typically aren't showing up in the conversations of, okay, which of these offenses are going to take a big step forward this year, right? Everybody talks about the San Francisco 49ers, or they're talking about the Cardinals, right? I think that potentially breakout offensive team this year could be the freaking Jets.
Well, I'm not going to draft Le'Veon Bell because, number one, I think he's going way too high. I wouldn't mind drafting the guy if he was in the 2nd round, middle of the 2nd round, and I went, DeAndre Hopkins at 5 or 6 and then came back around to Le'Veon Bell. I wouldn't mind that. Now, I hate it. I mean, I really do. I'm not a fan of it at all. But after, let's say I was the only one that went wide receiver in the 1st round, just like you're kind of saying,
yep.
We're listening to all these expert drafts now that, 4th of July is kind of coming around, and there's a lot of weird formats and whatever that's getting pushed out there. One of them being the format that we talked about kind of last couple weeks is no defense, no kickers being more popularized, which is 100% us, because of our cast.
Oh, absolutely.
Not even close. But Le'Veon Bell is going as high as 6 that I've seen. I would never touch him at 5. I don't think anyone else would either, because there's just no way in heck that D-Hop is getting past 5, I feel. But he has been.
You're seeing Hopkins fall to 110, 109.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but I just don't think that when all the dust settles, he will be the guy drafted at 5, I believe. But if he's not, somebody's picking him in the 1st round. Outside of that, I can see every other running back going. Like you said, Melvin Gordon, David Johnson, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, and Le'Veon Bell. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that every one of those guys goes. and D-Hop, and then you have, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham, and these guys. And so I'm just not touching him this year, and I'm okay with not touching him. But I do want to circle back around on the idea of Robbie Anderson.
Yes.
Robbie Anderson is not somebody I'm targeting this year, purely because I have better guys that I like in a round or two after him, where I feel like there's no point for me to go at Robbie's, a high draft capital on Robbie Anderson when I can go to a guy who I believe will finish higher than him a round or two later, i.e. Christian Kirk. Okay. Yeah. And that's my whole thing. Also in that round, I've been sneakily finding my way to Geis and or Juice. And I am loving Juice because I don't feel like anybody, there's not hype. There's just no hype right now about him. Seems like all the talk that people are giving Juice, all the concern is like, oh, well, he was injured last year. It doesn't seem like there's any upside talk about this guy. And so when you look at Le'Veon Bell and you look at Darius Geis, okay, they both missed the whole entire year last year. And so what do you want? I feel like you're arbitraging Le'Veon Bell with Geis. Obviously, guys can't catch the ball like Le'Veon Bell does, so I would give a round of value to Le'Veon for that reason. But still, I mean, if I'm picking up Geis in the 6th round and I give Le'Veon Bell a round of extra value because he's a better PPR asset, still has nowhere near the value, Le'Veon Bell. Now you circle again back around to Darnold, who I think is being undervalued. Because if we look at him taking a step forward this year, which a step forward for him last year was, like you said, the statistically #1 rated quarterback in all of the month of December. Okay. His step forward is a top 10 quarterback, like in just the league. And if we assume that he might succumb to that positive like step forward, then you have to take an extra round up for a guy like Robbie Anderson. So to me, Robbie Anderson is drafted at his ceiling right now. Like Robbie Anderson literally, I think he has to show out with Darnold to have that 5th or 6th round value, like just in the draft and the scheme of the draft.
He's done it. I mean, it's not like we're trying to speculate and say, okay, this is a guy that we've got upside, that we're projecting upside for. I mean, he's done it in his career. So, and you look at his stats. I mean, his 40-yard dash, 4.41, speed score 103, 78th percentile. I mean, he's got the talent. You look at who he's being drafted around. I mean, would you rather have Jarvis Landry or Robbie Anderson? Straight up, or Will Fuller, who's coming off an injury, or Marvin Jones, who had an off year last year.
I would not have Fuller, and I would not have Marvin. Those guys are not, but I would definitely rather have Jarvis. Robbie Anderson's 190 pounds.
But Jarvis is the #2 in his team, and it's not like it's just like the 1-2. It's Beckham and Jarvis. There's other guys. There's David Njoku. There's obviously Nick Chubb. Duke Johnson's going to get a couple. He's going to touch the ball. I think that he's another guy who's going underrated. I just think that in New York, I mean, Robbie Anderson's the guy, right? There's Anderson and there's Bell, and then there's a bunch of decent supporting cast members. But Robbie Anderson, I mean, he can take. You talk about how much you love a guy like Tyreek Hill because he can take one to the house every play. Robbie Anderson's the same sort of player, and I think that, I mean. To your point, I would probably take Christian Kirk above Robbie Anderson, but I would take Robbie Anderson above Jarvis, Will Fuller. These are kind of like the secondary running backs that are typically going there. There's like the Tariq Cohens that are typically going around that spot. The reason I'm not getting a lot of Robbie Anderson so far is because I typically target one of these second tier tight ends in that range, right around that range where he's going, because I just feel a little bit more comfortable unless a guy like George Kittle or Zach Ertz falls to me, call it 2.10 to 11. I would more comfortable getting either 2 running backs in those first 2 rounds or 1 receiver and 1 running back in that round. I just think that Kittle is naturally going to regress a little bit. So I don't want to spend my second round draft capital on him. And then Zach Ertz, I think there's just the Dallas Goedert effect. There's so, like, I think the Philly offense, that's another one that's going to be fantastic this year, but that's just because there's so many talented players on that team. I don't think Zach Ertz is somebody that I'm comfortable drafting in round 2. So then I'm taking those second tier tight ends at that point. I think that OJ Howard would be off the board, but typically a Jared Cook, maybe your boy Hunter, Evan Ingram, those guys are going right around round 5 and 6. So that just means that I'm pretty much out on the Robbie Anderson.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You're not. The problem with saying that you're drafting Robbie Anderson at his ceiling isn't saying that, like, what his actual production's going to be or anything like that. It's purely that he's overrated in the draft. His ADP is too high. Most people should be out on Robbie Anderson if he's going 2 rounds ahead of Christian Kirk, which makes no sense. And if we want to talk about how Robbie Anderson did it, okay? So Robbie Anderson, at his height in his career, 63 receptions, 941 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Okay, so to say he did it, okay, well, last year, Jarvis Landry, 976 with 81 receptions. So essentially 20 more receptions with 30 more yards, but he had 2 less touchdowns than Robbie did last year, but he had 3 less touchdowns than he did at Robbie's best year. Jarvis Landry, to think that because Odell Beckham's coming into the offense that he's not going to be productive. Well, look at Jarvis Landry's stats. Okay, we talk about in 2015 at 110 catches for 1157. 2016, 94 catches for 1136. 2017, 112 catches for 987. 2018, 81 catches, 976. Yes, he was the number 1 in his offense essentially for most of that time, but that doesn't mean this guy's production is just going to fall off a cliff, okay? Robbie Anderson last year only had 752 yards, and sure, I mean, he didn't play the entire season, which is fine, but when you look at player for player, quarterback for quarterback, offense for offense, the Browns are way better than the Jets. And so, yeah, you're saying that you're going to bet on Robbie Anderson's number 1 receiver versus Jarvis Landry's number 2 receiver in that offense. To me, that's actually a way better stat output for the idea of Jarvis Landry this year. I've seen number 2 receivers in high-profile offenses outscore tons of people. I mean, you loved to have Randall Cobb in the height of his career, just as that guy on your team as your number 3. You start him as your number 3, but he's a number 2 in a high-profile offense. You get him as your number 3. Robbie Anderson, you're having to draft Robbie Anderson as your number 2 receiver. Okay, that's not
necessarily. I mean, if we're talking round 6, right, late round 6. I mean, he could be easily your number 3 receiver, or say, I mean, I think, like, as we're kind of talking through this, to me, I'm kind of convincing myself of, if, say I have 1 receiver right now. Say I got, I don't know, like a Brandon Cooks or something like that in round 5. And say I went tight end early in round 2. So I went and I got, I don't know, let's say I got Melvin Gordon in the middle of the first round, came around, I got a George Kittle, then maybe I went Marlon Mack in round 3, and then I went in round 4, Derrick Henry, and then in round 5 I went Robert Woods or Brandon Cooks, one of those guys, right? So upside potential to be a number 1, but I wouldn't put him as one of those top elite players. I would be pretty comfortable with Robbie Anderson as my number 2 wide receiver at that point, because, okay, going back to the Jarvis versus Anderson conversation, Jarvis Landry is a volume receiver. The reason he's been so productive in his career is because he gets the volume, he gets the targets. He's not going to get that this year in Cleveland. He's not the number one dog on his team anymore. I mean, honestly, if he was a number one receiver, I would be a little bit more comfortable, but still, like, he's got limitations. I would be more comfortable with Robbie Anderson as my number 2 receiver, knowing that I need upside. I want upside at that point, right? Because there are so many other players later on in your draft that you can get to kind of bolster out that wide receiver core. I'm going for the upside with Robbie Anderson versus a guy who, like, because Anderson can get you 15 to 20 points in a game, in a week, right? Whereas I think that Jarvis, I mean, he's going to be probably pretty steady with his floor between 9 to 12 points per game, but I don't see a lot of upside because it doesn't score the touchdowns. And so depending on how you've built your team, if you want to win every single week, granted, with Robbie Anderson, I think that his floor obviously is a little bit lower, right? To your point, if he doesn't get those, say, a 30-yard reception that leads to a touchdown, he might be putting up 5 points for you. But I think that the fact that you've got that running back core already, right? Like, based on the scenario that we've talked about, they've pretty much set your floor in terms of points every single week. And so if you want to win that matchup, I think that a guy like Robbie Anderson will help you win that matchup that week.
Well, so we're talking about volume. So you're saying Jarvis Landry is a volume receiver, always has been. So yes. Is the guy getting 80 catches this year? 80, which to me is not a volume receiver. A volume receiver is 100 catch ball. That's a volume receiver. So,
but or maybe about targets, right? Like, we're talking about, like, if he's getting close to 100 yeah.
Is he getting 80 receptions? So you're saying that he was a volume receiver.
Yep.
Okay. And that was the bulk of his production. Is he getting 80 receptions this year, down from his highest season at like 117 or something like that? I don't have the stat.
How many, you said he got 85 last year?
Sorry. I didn't. Hold on.
Yes, it's right
test,
right?
Yeah. Last year he got 81.
Okay, so essentially it's, do we think he can repeat last year's season this year?
As a number 2.
As a number 2? You know why? I want to say yes, I think he can do it. I think he's got the potential to do it. I think there's a little bit of risk, obviously, based on what we just talked about. But I think that going back to the quarterback play, right? Baker Mayfield, he is extremely accurate with the ball. And I think that he's going to be able to dish out the ball to a guy like Jarvis. And I think that you're going to run a lot of plays this year. I mean, I think that you're going to have an up-tempo offense this year. So, yeah, I think that there's the realm of possibility that he could get his 80 receptions. He can get probably between 800 to 950 yards. He might get 4 touchdowns, right? So, to me, that's the issue. It's the touchdowns.
Okay, so then that's actually a volume receiver still as a number 2. Okay, so there was only 21 guys in the league last year that got 80 catches or more. 21. Okay. So he is top 21 in the league for receptions. And you're saying, or the idea is that he is only producing because of volume. Well, let's reduce his number 1 receiver volume from 117 to 80, and he's still top 21 in the league. And he's being drafted after Robbie Anderson, which is the exact reason why I am out on Robbie Anderson. Not going to draft him. He's not worth it. And just like you said, hey, Robbie Anderson might give you 5 points a couple weeks. Well, here's the thing. At 80 receptions divided by 16 games, that's 5 points anyway a game, just based off his average reception target or reception rate as Jarvis Landry. And so Jarvis Landry's floor is the worst, like one of the bad games or 2 or 3 bad games that Robbie Anderson will have. That's just Jarvis's floor. When you start adding up the yards, the potential touchdowns, the idea that Odell is gonna, they might stack the box on Jarvis, leave or on Chubb, leave Jarvis out there, double coverage with the safety over top to Odell. Jarvis might have a very, very good season this year. And instead of saying we're sleeping on the Jets, let's draft Nick Chubb 5 picks after Le'Veon Bell, and let's draft Jarvis Landry a round or 2 after Robbie Anderson. And then I
should just say, Matt, So Jarvis Landry, his ADP right now is 6.06, whereas Robbie Anderson is 6.1. So
There you go.
Anderson is going just after Jarvis.
606 and 6. You
10.
just said
610.
Oh,
So 606
610. You said
yeah.
6.1. Okay, so
No,
I mean they're
610.
right there. I'm just not. Yeah, I have no. Why would I ever draft Why would I ever draft Robbie Anderson? Why?
I think it goes back to just the initial conversation. It's and this is I don't want to be too cliche, but it's floor versus upside, I suppose, right?
So you're telling me that Robbie Anderson has more upside than Jarvis Landry?
Yeah, because
when
Robbie Anderson can take a 70-yard touchdown to the house, man.
Oh my gosh, Jarvis can do that too. He could do that probably better than Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson sucks, okay? You heard it here first. Robbie Anderson sucks, okay? 190 pounds, Robbie Anderson. Let's look at Jarvis Landry's weight. I'm sorry, I don't know how much he weighs. 203, there you go, 13 more pounds. Touchdown for every pound, okay? That's all I got to say. Look at the upside.
Man.
Upside of what? Okay, and we got the kids coming in here saying hi. No, but we should probably end this here pretty soon. Spirited conversation on the Jets. Really appreciate that. Sorry that I had to tangent. I was tangentially.
No, I love it. That's what we do, right? That's what we do.
I'm a Browns homer this year. I am so 100% in on the Browns this year.
I know.
You could mute your mic if you would like to for a second. Thank you. So I'm in on the Browns this year. You know, if Jarvis Landry falls from his number 1 wide receiver production to a number 2 wide receiver production, he is better than most people's number 1 wide receiver. And that's all I'm saying is Jarvis is undervalued, Robbie's overvalued, and Christian Kirk is the perfect value because he could be top 12 wide receiver this year. Book it, name it. Shaner, what do you got to end this thing here?
All right, Pat. I don't know too much. Listen, guys, give us a follow and hey, subscribe to this podcast and give us some reviews. You know, this is a work in progress and we would love any sort of feedback you can get. And you know what? Give us some topic ideas. If there's something that you want us to talk about, because as you can tell, we like to talk about the obscure conversations. We like to break down the specifics. We don't want to talk about top 10s, that sort of thing. So give us your obscure topic, whether you want to write us a review in Apple Podcasts or however you get it, or if you want to check us out on Twitter, check us out at Sealy_Shane.
We are also brought to you by ourselves, the Flex Network. We're getting our graphics up and running in a lot better way. We're getting our audio and our video up and running in a lot better way. Please stay tuned because we are doing what we can to make this a better overall enjoyable experience for you. As for Shane, I am Matt. This is the Flex Network.
This is the Flex Network. This is the Flex Network. Flex on them. Flex on everybody. This right here is the Flex Network. Yeah. Flex on them, G.